Joining us from Washington is James Carafano, Vice President of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. James was a member of the Trump transition team working on matters of state and homeland security. James, thanks for being with us.
It's good to be with you.
Let me start by asking you, on the day the executive order was signed, there was still some confusion within agencies about how to implement it. What exactly went wrong with the rollout, in your opinion?
Well, so I have no idea about how the rollout went. So I worked on the transition team, but my work formally ends on the day of the inauguration. So what the new administration did with the transition work and how it rolled out, I don't have any special insight to that.
Well, let me ask you, many, including Republican lawmakers, criticized the executive order for being too broad. Do you agree? And if so, what improvements would you suggest?
So I understand the intent behind the executive order, which I actually agree with, which is this is looking at the emergent threat. So we had tens of thousands of foreign fighters flood into Iraq and Syria to fight for ISIS. As they lose ground and territory, those fighters have to outflow somewhere, and the 7 countries listed are the ones where they're most likely to flow to. And that's just not the Trump administration. The Obama administration thought exactly the same thing. The Europeans thought exactly the same thing. The Europeans actually have similar constraints on visa issuance on their Schengen visa. So the concept of doing that, I think, is absolutely sound. To be honest with you, I think most of what we've heard in terms of the response really talks about people's politics and reacting to the controversy after that actually deals with the substance of the order.
Let me press you on that just a little. We have heard, though, from Republican lawmakers, as you well know, who say that they had not been briefed on this ahead of time. And I know you said that your duties ended on January 20th, but in order to communicate this order's substance, wouldn't it have been prudent to perhaps bring in some of the president's allies on Capitol Hill who have said on the record that they weren't necessarily notified ahead of time?
Well, I think that's a fair criticism to say that they could have been more informative in how they rolled it out. I believe on one hand, you have an administration that's very intent on rolling out orders to demonstrate that it's serious about its agenda. So that's something they're thinking about. I think they're also concerned that, on January 20th, and essentially they own this problem. So if there's a terrorist attack on January 21st, they'd get blamed for it. And if their defense was, well, we were just doing what the Obama guys did, that wouldn't ring very true. The other thing is just kind of cutting through the Gordian knot. There was going to be controversy about this order because of the nature of the president and his campaign comments, regardless of what it said and when it was rolled out. So I think the notion that somehow people were briefed more and if foreign leaders were briefed more, we wouldn't have seen people rushing down to JFK Airport. I mean, I just think that's fanciful.
Let me ask you about the substance of this order. It does focus on external threats, as you laid out. But what about the threat of homegrown extremism? Do you think the president should take additional action on that front?
I think that's a great question. That's the present threat. So one of the things we do at the Heritage Foundation is we track Islamist-related terrorist plots aimed at the United States since 9/11. We've seen the number of plots increasing. We're up to 94 Islamist-related plots since 9/11. And overwhelmingly, increasingly, especially over the last 8 years, those plots have been homegrown, and the last dozen or so have been homegrown. So that's the present threat. And I think this administration, like the past administration, has to be 24/7, 365 focused on the domestic, the potential for domestic plots. And you find those by good investigations, good counterterrorism operations, good intelligence sharing. I mean, that's something that you have to do. And I think this administration has an obligation to do that. What I thought was actually smart about this order is, people often get accused of fighting the last war. And this administration, I think to its credit, we're looking at the emergent threat, which is where is the next wave of terrorism likely to come from? And again, it's not just the United States that's worried about this. It's South Asia, it's Western Europe, that foreign fighters could try to exfiltrate from these 7 countries, either through a visa fraud, or claiming to be a third-party national, or they could try to get into the refugee trail and try to exit that way. And actually, we have seen terrorists go to Western Europe using both those methods. So I think they were being prudent, and people were inconvenienced, and I think that's true. And I think one of the things that the administration had to weigh was they have responsibility. On the one hand, They have to weigh the likelihood that people are going to be inconvenienced and there are going to be some issues. And on the other hand, if something happened and there was a terrorist attack on the scale of, say, Paris or Brussels, you know, the inconvenience of people kind of having their relatives killed. And so they decided that the potential threat was significant enough that I think they were willing to have the political backlash, and they were willing to have, you know, people be inconvenienced, because I think they felt a responsibility to make sure that from day one on their watch, they were doing everything possible to make sure foreign fighters don't wind up in the United States.
And on the homegrown threat, should there be action on that as well?
Well, I think that as they reviewed the policies on visa issuance from countries where we know foreign fighters are, the potential of foreign fighters to sneak in as refugees from the same countries, they have to review the internal procedures and look at, for example, the programs that are currently in existence, the cooperation between the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. I must say, you know, having worked with General Kelly in the run-up to his nomination for the Department of Homeland Security, I think he is an outstanding leader. I think he's the perfect guy to run this department. I think he really understands how you do practical, competent counterterrorism operations domestically that really work. I think he's committed to partnering with the FBI and the Department of Justice on this. And so I think they'll, to the best of their abilities, do a pretty good job on the domestic front. And, you know, I have to add, you know, if you look at the domestic threat, if you had every person that's been involved in a terrorist attack and every person that's been arrested for material support, that's a population of about 1,000 extremists inside the United States. We have 330 million people here. So it's not like we're chasing down a vast, huge internal threat.
Lastly, James, I wanted to ask you, some critics argue that this executive order will drive more Muslims into the arms of ISIS. Among those critics, Senator John McCain, who spoke with our John Dickerson on Face the Nation Sunday. I wonder how you respond to that criticism.
Well, you know, I hear that, and I've heard it before, and it's largely baseless, I think, because there's no facts to back that up. As a matter of fact, if you look at the last 8 years, President Obama has consciously said, let's not be antagonistic towards the Muslim world. He started with his Cairo speech, and it's been the centerpiece of his foreign policy for 8 years. And terrorism has skyrocketed over the last 8 years. There's more terrorist attack globally. There's more plots in the United States globally. There is more deaths from terrorism globally. So if it was just about not antagonizing people and we wouldn't create more terrorists, then the problem would have been solved. I think it's much more complex to that. The notion, I think it's farcical, the notion that what we say is the only thing that drives terrorist behavior. I think we've actually seen the opposite of that. Our actions are actually incidental to what's actually being the big recruiting and motivating tools. So I hear these criticisms, but to be honest with you, I think they're largely driven by people's political opinions and their assumptions and beliefs. They're not factually based in the data that we know about patterns of extremism over the last decade.
All right, James Carafano in Washington. James, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.